All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode, I think it's 171 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. We are waiting on my co-host, Ian Cummer, to join us. He's having some technical issues. Also, I need to mention that our other co-host, Carlo Parcelli, is not doing well health-wise, and I want everyone to keep him in their thoughts and prayers. He is struggling with some health issues. So we wish for the best. We hope for the best, but he's not doing too well right now. So keep him in our thoughts and prayers. Now, I have two special guests today. Our first special guest is a first-time guest, and she is streaming live from Colorado, and she is a geopolitical analyst and historian. And I really appreciate her reaching out to us and wanted to join our discussion today. Christine Lynn, again, like I said, she's in Colorado. And then our other regular special guest that everybody is familiar with, Greg Rosen, streaming live from Chicago, Illinois. I titled today's episode, Stalin's Victory and the Next War on Humanity, which kind of, it's my way of trying to tie history to our future and how the two, to try and discuss how these two are related. And I think we can talk for hours about the relationship between what is going on now and what happened with the big, huge conflagration of World War II. Now, like I said, Ian is having some technical difficulties. He should pop in soon, but we can really go in any direction. But let's start with history. So let me ask Christine if she just open it up to her and see. Do we want to talk first about Stalin, or do you want to just maybe introduce yourself and share a little about where you're at? That's
sure. Well, since it is my debut on your show, I want you to know and the audience to know I am very happy to be here on November 7th, the 108th anniversary of the Great October Revolution. The synchronistic, I didn't even think of that when you and I were discussing coming on Billy Bob, and it turned out to be today. And I will share with you, I have been on many talk shows across the United States and a few in the UK over the last 20 years. And never have I been on a show with my fellow comrades, with fellow communists. So I really feel very happy that it coincided, that it was on November 7th. A little bit about myself. I am a historian and geopolitical analyst. My work has taken me for many years as a U.S. constitutionalist. In my younger years, I really felt it was just a matter of educating people, making the Constitution work. Again, in my younger years and my naivety, though I had good intentions. But it was later that I came to understand, and all my gratitude to Joseph Stalin and his writings completely reached my heart and my mind, my thoughts, my logic. To me, critical thinking is a priority in life. And in fact, my highest priority in life is truth. I am an Orthodox Christian and I am a communist. And I look for truth wherever I found it. And before finding Stalin's writings, and really delving deep into his collected works, his interviews, I never questioned. Well, I won't say I never questioned, but I didn't question enough and have the awareness of the inherent evil of capitalism. And it is what is responsible for all of the evil, the great evil. In fact, the United States is the most evil, has committed the most evil, suffering and millions of deaths in the world. And it all comes back to capitalism. and imperialism. For decades, I've spoken against imperialism, but it wasn't informed by Stalin and Lenin. And once I really delved deeply into Stalin's writing, I said, this is the truth. And this is why it's fundamentally flawed. And stop thinking about making the United States and its system better, and understand that the duopoly, left and right, and Democrats and Republicans, and all of this nonsense, a nice word for it, is meaningless, because at the core, as Stalin and Lenin taught us, it's always going to lead to, capitalism will lead to imperialism, which I've always rejected for many years since I was a teenager. And so that changed me, and I no longer care one bit about saving the United States, helping in any way the political parties. Instead, I devote myself to the truth and sharing the truth that Stalin and Lenin taught us. And I would just have to say that as a historian, I've always gone far beyond what people regurgitate and say in history. And when I saw all of the lies, the rampant lies, not just from Khrushchev onward, and sadly never repudiated in Soviet Union and in Russia, and it needs to be repudiated. But I went into the declassified. I've often gone into the archives of the NKVD, the KGB, the CIA, and preceding that. And as those documents become declassified, I actually found the documents, Billy Bob. And I know I'm digressing, but it was something really instrumental to me. And it showed how the United States feared Stalin, not because the Soviet Union militarily and all this later Cold War nonsense, none of that. They feared him because of how wonderful the Soviet Union was. What a success. I mean, Stalin built the Soviet Union prior to the Great Patriotic War, was a great and wise leader during the war, and then had to rebuild the society. And he did it as a success. And the entire world was watching, and never did we have the Communist Party in other countries grow as much as then. One of the declassified documents actually cited that it was the education that Stalin's people that were being given, the literacy rate, they said the number one threat to the U.S. hegemony was the fact that the Soviet people were being so educated. And for me, that just said it all. The lies, the CIA operations in the Soviet Union, which began long before most people are aware, all of that just showed me they fear the truth. And that is why I have devoted myself to sharing the truth about Stalin, the man that he was, the leader that he was, and the good of communism.
Yeah, I don't think any figure in history has been more lied about, maligned than Stalin. And one of the quotes from him, in his final days was that at some point, all the lies are going to be about him are going to be blown away, or something to that effect. And
off of his grave. Yeah, he knew they would lie about him, and that it would ultimately be off of his grave. And that is what the United States operates on, are the lies. But you're right. He's probably the most vilified man in history by the West. And that tells you he was doing everything right.
Yeah. And, Mao is the same way. And the lies are kind of, in direct proportion of the opposite. Right. And so,
how much they accomplish.
What's that? Go ahead, Greg.
So how much they accomplish.
Yeah. So in the West, and not to change the subject from Stalin to Mao, but they're very related. And they were, they were close, and they worked well together. And it's unfortunate that Stalin died when he did. But Mao is often accused of being the greatest mass murderer in the the history of the known universe. So they say, Hitler was bad and Stalin was bad, but Mao was the worst because he killed 100 million people. Anyway, in actual fact, Mao probably is the greatest humanitarian of all time, simply by the metrics of he did more good for more people than anyone else, simply because of the size of China's population and the low level at which they were at when Mao came to power in 1949. Average life expectancy 35 years. So before Mao left, he had doubled life expectancy and he had doubled the population and he had doubled caloric intake. And so by these metrics, you can make a very powerful case that instead of being the greatest mass murderer of all time, Mao, of course, was the greatest humanitarian of all time, which is far closer to the actual truth. But so yeah, it's the West. I mean, it's it's what you got to expect with their nonsense. I mean, even this morning, I'm just dealing with people online because it's a hobby for me. But complaining about the whole Holodomor, well, Stalin, killed all these people by taking all the grain out of Ukraine. So it's these are just pervasive myths that have just been indoctrinated into people's minds. And so it's very important that we do what we can to correct these errors and try to proliferate truth. But we're up against a machine, a propaganda machine, so it's difficult. Christine?
Yeah, and I think it's very important that we make the distinction when we're talking about these lies and dark myths, that we identify it as lying propaganda. Propaganda in itself is not a bad word. It's very important to describe the lying propaganda. I agree with everything you said about Mao, as well as about Stalin. It reminded me of something else that I remembered in taking a look at the archives CIA declassified in regards to Stalin and the gulags, and again, just like Mao was maligned with this lying propaganda, when they talk about Stalin and the Holodomor, a complete lie. They even reference in the CIA papers the fact that it was far worse in the United States. Caloric intake of prisoners, the percentage of those incarcerated citizens, never compared to anything done in the Soviet Union. And what they always also neglect to say is that the very few, compared to the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, whatever number they want to pull out of nowhere, that they say were murdered, which were not, but those who did were in a court, in a hearing, were found guilty of actual crimes. And it was actually more rare that there would be execution. But the executions came when people were actually involved in crimes. And I found so many people overlook that when they talk about persons that they call martyrs and people who were working. No, in fact, they were actually working with the fifth column and Western money in order to overthrow the government. And no government is going to accept that. But no comparison to the treatment of prisoners in what the West likes to call the gulags and the treatment of U.S. prisoners at the time.
Any thoughts, Greg? I was going to say that, I mean, yeah, mass incarceration is a reality right now in the United States. And we have more incarcerated people than, any other society by total numbers and by percentage of population. So, yeah, I mean, if you compare and contrast the penal systems of the Soviet Union with, the United States doesn't come off looking good. I am liable to agree that there was excesses in the Soviet Union, and I kind of think that the NKVD was being led by like a fifth columnist, which is kind of the narrative that I kind of am beholden to and think is true. What was the guy's name that was he was actually found guilty and executed for the crimes that he committed as the leader of the NKVD or NKDV. I'm saying it wrong. Greg, what is that?
Yesov, are you thinking?
What's his name? Ezov.
Yesov? Yes.
Yeah, Ezov. So, people like what is the Grover Fur? So Grover Fur refers to it as
yeah.
So that's his take, is that Ezov was somewhat of a fifth columnist engaging in excesses to kind of undermine the government, and so there were some really excesses and unnecessary things that were going on under Ezov, and which he was ultimately convicted of and executed for. But the numbers themselves have been grossly exaggerated. I think if you look at Google, like the total number of documented deaths was around 1 million people, maybe less than 1 million people. And, and again, you got to consider the time. I mean, this is the time when you're facing the invasion from the greatest, largest land invasion in the history of the known universe that ended up killing 30 million people. So, I mean, this is just a time we can't even, I live in a suburb in, California, and like we can't imagine what it would be like, how society would deal with being invaded by the largest invasion force in the history of the known universe that is going to kill 30 million of my neighbors. It's like normal thinking for me goes right out the window. It's a completely different universe. And so when suburbanites try and think, oh man, it was so bad in the Soviet Union because they put people in gulags and people were executed. It's like there's a context, and the context is everything. So you gotta be thoughtful and not just deep throat this Western. And again, like you said, propaganda definitely is not a bad thing, but we need to propagandize truth. We need to proliferate an understanding of truth, and Western propaganda is really synonymous with doing the opposite. That's for sure. So Ian is struggling. He's in Crimea, and Crimea has a notoriously bad internet connection, but he looks like he's here. Can you hear us, Ian?
Yes, if you can hear me. I'm not on the stage yet. Can you hear me?
No, I have. You're live with us. I'm not sure what you can see, but we can see you.
I didn't actually mean to be live, but that's okay. If I'm here, I'm here, and I'm, as you can see, I'm struggling with and that's not. This is actually just I apologize. I'm actually just gonna turn off my camera off until I have it. This is just a device I have not, because I normally use my computer in Moscow, but this is a completely different computer, and it's caused me some issues, which I apologize for. But
no worries, Ian. I popped you into onto the stage. So yeah, whenever you're ready, just let us know. But we have a comment.
I am listening. Yeah, I am listening. Okay.
We have a comment. I'm on the executive board of the Stalin Society of North America. I used to be in a regular correspondence with the professor. He's very pleasant. No, that's cool. I think Mr. Skoidat, we have disagreed on things, but I'm glad we agree on that. And so I appreciate your appreciation of Stalin. So what is the relevance? Like, what is Stalin's relevance to today? Why is a correct understanding and a correct appreciation of Stalin important for where we're at today? Christine, if you could take that would be great.
Yeah, I would. I did want to make a comment on something you said, Billy Bob, in terms of the numbers. Yes, actual numbers seem to be more like between 700 to 800,000 in terms of those who were executed, which again is a very tiny fraction compared to the population of the Soviet Union at the time. And the vast majority of those were not even political, which were also justified when you take a look and examine the documents on the evidence that was brought against them. The sabotage, some of those people actually engaged in terrorism against the Soviet people, poisoning of food, of course, attempted assassinations or successful assassinations of party personnel. Yeah. So it's really just part of the lying propaganda of the West. In terms of the importance today, absolutely. I feel that that is why we should all be sharing the truth of who Stalin was, because the West's lying propaganda about Stalin was to discredit the complete success that we discussed earlier of the Soviet Union. They feel that and they have been very successful. I mean, millions of people, you say the name Stalin and they come out with all their brutal tyrant and mass murder and all of this complete lies, and it's all they know. And even the historians, and I use that word loosely, that Western media will quote, are simply regurgitating and saying the same thing over and over. They never go to actual documentation or the first sources and all of that. But it's extremely important right now. We are at a time when we are so close at any time to a World War III that will be devastating for everyone in the world. We are also at a time of financial economic crisis. You take a look at what's happening in the United States, so much for their freedom, liberty, and their nonsense about being a democracy. And the Americans have never suffered, really. I mean, there have been times and in the 30s, but not suffered like the Soviet people suffered. And thus, the Soviet people who loved Stalin and appreciated Stalin, and I would say thrived that in terms of the science, the literacy. I mean, they made such great strides. People know it. If you can still talk to them, or if you've talked to them before their death, people remember that time so fondly. And it is that socialism, Stalin's socialism, communism, that is the answer. But yet, if the West can continue to succeed in its dismissal of everything that was based on their lies, then they will never get people like Americans or people in other Western countries to question the fundamental flawed system of capitalism. They don't want that. They never want that to be questioned. So they vilify us, they demonize it, and it is up to us to tell that truth, because there is hope. And Stalin showed us it can work, but nobody will even listen to you if they believe the lies about him to begin with. Also in Russia, I feel it is fundamentally important that those who know the truth really focus. And I know that there are those who do, but for example, today is November 7th. It's up to the Russian people, of course, to decide, but there are so many who wanted this to be commemorated as a holiday, as it should be. Russia is on a path of evolution, just as each of us as individuals are. And I don't think that there is anything more important than, for me, what reached me was Stalin's writings. And for those of us who can articulate that doctrine and Lenin's to people, that there is an alternative. And that alternative cannot be dismissed, like you've been told, because socialism, communism does work. And that's the fundamental truth. And if they can malign the main person that, from the Russia, and of course it supports the Russophobia. The United States has engaged in decades, even prior to World War II, in its attempts and its plans to divide Russia. So I just think that Stalin's truth can reach some of those with critical thinking. I have to say, though, Billy Bob, I don't have much hope in the American people. I think many of them, not just because they haven't suffered, but their fundamental values, Anglo-Saxon values, is of greed. And even if they are the oppressed, only a few like us can be reached with that truth, because so many have that knee-jerk reaction to as soon as you speak of communism or Stalin or the Soviet Union. But that is, I just find many Americans to be shallow and willfully ignorant. If you bring the truth, even about, for example, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, instead of listening, they grow angry. They don't listen. And it just seems to be a part of this society, sadly. But for those who will listen, whether it's in the U.S. or other Western countries, it's very important that we share these principles, because they're the only thing that will work. They're only the thing that I think will prevent a World War III, because imperialism is going that way.
That, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, I say the same thing. It's like, unfortunately, our society has been too propagandized. It's been too divided and fractured with all these different liberal iterations. You got your conservatives, your liberals, your libertarians, people who, identify with the Constitution, the nationalists. You got, the religious group, anti-communist religious groups. So it seems that, for the people to unite and overcome these differences, develop a cohesive working class political movement to overthrow the oligarchs and take control of the state, for the interest of the working class. Like, for that to happen, like it seems like it's going to be generations away to be charitable. And so I always look to, what Russia is doing, what China is doing, and they're doing more to progress humanity than the domestic population of the imperial core. So these people are going to be a drag on humanity for generations to come due to this indoctrination that they have accepted. And I really have a lot of hatred. And I think that the people who are responsible for this indoctrination and are responsible for destroying the minds of the United States citizens, like those people deserve a special place in hell, and they deserve a lot of contempt for what they have done, because it is going to be a drag on humanity for generations to come. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the every day I'm engaged with these people who just reflexively, regurgitate these mythological historical narratives about, the Holodomor and things like that. Ian, any thoughts? I see that you're maybe your tech issues have been dealt with.
Yes, they have been dealt with, and it's a very surreal experience. This is a laptop I ordered online, and the webcam is on the bottom corner of the screen. I've never in my life seen that before, so I'm like looking down on all of you. It's a very strange experience. No, I think Christine made some good points. I would say in general, well, there's two things that come to my mind. So one, when it comes to these narratives, hegemonic narratives, regime narratives, whatever you want to call them, for U.S. internal audiences, there's very much this strongman narrative. So we take the image, the perception of these adversarial countries, and boil them down to like, oh well, it's a slave population with this strongman dictator, and it's just a personal show for him. So they do that with China. They do that with the Soviet Union. They do it with Russia, Iran. They do it with all of them. I mean, yes, to some extent, some countries have monarchies, some have dictatorships, some are more authoritarian than others. But you notice they take that same template and shoehorn every single country into it, whether it's true or not. It's so interesting. So like, just pick any country that's not in the best terms with the USA, and you can see that template fits in.
Maduro.
Fits right, Maduro in Venezuela, right,
Saddam.
Gaddafi in Libya, yeah, all of them. I mean, to some degree, yeah, some of them were kind of authoritarian or dictators, but you can see that whether it's true or not, they apply it to all of them. Now, the second thing is, I do think when it comes to, I think especially with Americans, I think this is unfortunately especially true for Americans, we can go to the opposite, because we have this right idea. Oh, well, I'm pushing back on this CIA narrative, so it's possible to fall too deep into the opposite extreme, which is over idealized. And I think so. I think the best thing to do is to have a realistic approach. Like so like with Stalin, right? I mean, he's a man. He's not a god. He's not perfect. He definitely had his share of mistakes. I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree with that. With that statement, we can also say why. I think the important question is to ask why Russia and currently alive Russians and people in former Soviet countries like Stalin. Well, I would say there's a couple of reasons. Well, one, he was the leader of the country during World War II. He was the leader of the country during industrialization. Well, for the bulk of industrialization, so he was at the head of the national efforts to save the country from fascism and just industrialization in general. And also, he did go against. I wouldn't say go against Lenin, but he definitely modified some of Lenin's ideas. Let's say, he was very much There's a saying, Stalinism is realism, which a lot of people say. Sometimes you have to take one step backwards, take two steps forwards. Even if you look at the monuments, like you'll notice there's monuments to Lenin and there's monuments to Stalin. If you actually pay attention to them, you'll see the difference. Lenin, has an arm outstretched. He's in a very dynamic posture, taking a step forward into the future. And if you look at statues of Stalin, you'll see he's not stepping forward. He's standing upright. He's standing like a bulwark. So if you actually look at that, pay attention, look at the statues of Lenin and Stalin, and you'll see the difference. It looks like Christine wants to say something.
Yeah, well, you need to be very careful about what you say about Stalin on this panel, but go ahead, Christine.
Thank you, Ian. Your 2 points in terms of what I said. Of course, in fact, one of the things that most people do not know, if they have not read enough of the encounters, and I've read several books of those who worked with Stalin or for Stalin in various capacities. And of course, he never actually wanted, and he even discussed with those closest to him, what can I do? I paraphrase, because of the cult of personality. He never actually encouraged that. He was a very humble man. I mean, I could talk to you, which I will not do, for half an hour just off the top of my mind of anecdotes of humility and compassion that Stalin evinced. And I would say that that's something that is lacking in people's understanding. And there was so much of that. But he never wanted to be perceived, as a godlike. In fact, I remember a passage in one of his essays in which he talked against any world leader. And that is why I consider Stalin, is an ideal in terms of a role model for leaders today. He never wanted to be put up on a pedestal, in terms of a cult of personality. And those around him would advise him, yeah, but you cannot, completely tap that down because the people's feelings. But he struggled with that going on. In regards to the statues, it brought up two thoughts to me, Ian. Number one, a lot of the statues that are being restored are being done by villages and cities, as you may very well know, being there and independently of the federal government. And many people are pitching in. And of course, we have communities that are far more Soviet friendly than others. And those statues are being restored, often based upon historical statues that were made, at the time or soon thereafter. And I would just have to share something that made me very happy, was that President Putin recently named the international airport in Volgograd. He now we are allowed to call it, we can land in Stalingrad, just the airport, not the city, but it's a step. And I think that it is very important step, because for many years, what you have seen in terms of anti-Stalin is anti our history in the Soviet Union. And we actually have adults now, not just the youth, but adults who have accepted all of that lying propaganda. And that is a disservice to what we need to go back to. In fact, I feel that the more the socialism, communism, and if I really keep a pulse on the people in the villages, particular cities and villages that I really have an affinity for. And even in their letters to the editor, I read a lot of newspapers and listen to a lot of Russian television and discussions and that type of thing. There really is that seed that I feel is being nourished to bring back more of that socialism and communism, especially as some of the taxes become more. But I just that was my comment on your comments, Ian.
Well, there's this thing about the cult of personality. There was the cult, but there was also there's also the personality. And what's interesting about Stalin is that even during and after de-Stalinification under Khrushchev, no one who was in Stalin's circle really really condemned him. Even people like a General Rokossovsky, who is the ethnic Pole, who was one of the major generals in World War II. He was actually in Gulag when the war started, and he was one of the people who was rehabilitated and released after the war started. Even people like him, like in his autobiography and just his public statements after Stalin died, no one didn't really condemn him, even though it was politically correct to. Even when it was politically correct to condemn Stalin and say he was a terrible person, and everything that's happened during the repressions and during the war was his fault. Most people who personally knew him and were in a position to actually say whether that's true or not didn't, declined to do so, which is
The big one,
which is
Khrushchev.
interesting.
Except the big denouncer, Khrushchev,
Well, Khrushchev, yes,
was his close associate.
yes. Though Khrushchev himself had some problems, didn't have the most illustrious career as the general secretary of the Soviet Union either. Stalin
Right.
was quite a bit more successful, I would say. When it comes to now, and like Christine mentioned, there's the Putin, the federal government is generally stays out of the Stalin discussion for the most part, stays out of the Stalin discussion. But you have this grassroots level, bringing him back at the township level. I think maybe even to, in some cases, the regional level people bring him back, and it's complicated. I'd say it's complicated, because there's emotional reasons, not just political reasons, too. And there are mixed feelings about. There are mixed feelings, of course, about the communist period. How you ask Russians, how do Russians feel about communism? That's complicated. There's just nostalgia, for sure. There's negative feelings, for sure. So there's a mix of both. And of course, there's nationalism, because one of the key differences between Lenin and Stalin is Stalin kind of made nationalism not a cuss word anymore. He brought, he was the one who introduced the hymn, the Great Rus, which is an actual lyric in the Soviet hymn. So it's actually, to an extent, it's actually interesting if you ask the Russians, Stalin is actually in some ways less controversial than Lenin, which is interesting, because in America you'd think it's the opposite. Stalin's the super controversial person, while Lenin isn't. But it's actually more of the reverse. So
I wanna jump in unless you're continuing.
No, go ahead. No.
Chris, did you have something to say?
One very quick comment first, Billy Bob, and very quick. One of the things that really, and I know it's up to the government and the people there, but really concerned me was when Solzhenitsyn was made into required reading for the youth in Russia, and certainly should be available. But to me, that was just very disturbing, and I think that it is a result because anyone was subject to the United States, the Western groups that came in there, even built some of these, quote, memorial museums. And if you research what they are saying in there, can be false names and victims. And, I've read the work of several researchers on this. But I just find that the West infiltration and the fifth column there has really had that result, so much so that Solzhenitsyn is honored. And I hope one day perhaps that will change.
He's very popular in the West. The Western anti-communists love to quote him, Solzhenitsyn, as if he's, not just making up shit. It's funny.
He's commonly.
I think Dust makes an important comment in the comments that Stalin was not a nationalist. I think it's important to patriotism for the war doesn't really detract from his long career of internationalism.
Right.
He was a
It was more. It
Georgian.
was right. It was more. Right, and I didn't say I didn't actually say if you pay attention to what I said. I didn't say he was a nationalist. I just said he didn't declare nationalism so much of a bad thing anymore. And
He
I do
did.
think
He railed
right.
against it.
Well, during the war, there's a necessity for more unity. So I can see the practicality of scaling back the attacks in the church, scaling back the attacks on Russian nationalism, at least temporarily. You can see the motive for doing that, especially in 1941, the way things were. There is a joke about Solzhenitsyn. He's Russia's greatest patriot, living in America. Was the joke about Solzhenitsyn. And I've asked a lot of people about Solzhenitsyn. It really depends who you ask. I'm not sure how exactly people feel about him. Some people love it. And white Russians like him. Anti-communists like him, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't think, again, because Putin is successor of Yeltsin. I mean, he went a different direction than a lot of people. I think he disappointed Yeltsin's Western backers, but at the same time, he's still Yeltsin's successor. So I don't think we're, at least in this generation, in this government, we're going to see them. Like Christine was wondering about. My take is they're not going to condemn Solzhenitsyn. I mean, they did discard the outright anti-Soviet, where you're just dumping on, where it was what used to be very popular, just dumping on the Soviet Union. Those Gulag rocks, the Gulag monuments that they had everywhere. Most of them were actually taken down, by the way. Most of the most prominent Gulag memorials were actually, they weren't destroyed. Typically, they don't usually destroy monuments in Russia. What they do is they'll just take it, they'll cart it away too, and because it's actually kind of common around here. A leader will be condemned, say, this person's terrible, then the next day, well, we were just kidding, this guy's actually okay. So then you bring the statue back out. It's like the Stalin himself, even you can see that. But the Gulag monuments went away. The
Memorial
the really
Foundation.
right, yeah, the foreign aid. I mean, really, you can kind of see, like Billy Bob and Christine, like all of you were kind of saying, you can really see how artificial and how foreign influenced the whole anti-Stalin, anti-Soviet rhetoric it was, when they either shut down these organizations or just required them to register as foreign agents. You see how the whole movement in a very short period of time just collapsed, because it was all coming from Washington. It was all coming through their NGOs. It was not organic to Russian society at all.
So I wanted to make the point that
And now it's unity.
Go ahead, Christine. I think there's a little bit of a delay, which is
you need to speak. But unifying that Stalin did, and we need that unification now. And I think that gradually, I agree with Ian. We don't know when it might happen, but I think that we do see those elements. Recently we just had the restoration, despite a road named after Solzhenitsyn and the required reading, but we see the restoration of that beautiful statue of Stalin and the children in the metro. I think it's actually the metro near Red Square. But we need that unity that he brought to us, and we need that now. And I think that appealing to that, and it's based on truth, is a good thing. Please go ahead, Billy Bob.
I was hoping to make an attempt to tie in, why getting history correct, especially the history of Stalin and the Soviet Union, and tie that in with ideology in order to bring us to where we're at now. And that's a daunting task, but essentially, I don't think that we can get Stalin wrong and then get right, what we need to do now. I think we need to, we need to, become a part of the great tradition, the great legacy, the great history of socialism. And so those Western leftists, for instance, who say, oh, that's not real socialism, Stalin was an authoritarian, that wasn't Marxism, that was like, those people have it so wrong, and there's such a a problem for understanding what is really going on and progressing from that. We can't progress unless we have a realistic understanding of what is going on, and we can't have a realistic understanding of what is going on if we don't understand history and what happened with history. And so it's just super important to get Stalin correct, to to be a part of that living history, that living reality, and to have it give energy and whatever to our movement today. So I don't know, that was my my effort to try and explain the importance of getting Stalin right. But of course, most people get Stalin wrong, and like, we're a tremendously vast minority of people who have a correct understanding of Stalin, even within those of us in the West that consider ourselves communists and Marxists. Because I would say that the majority of so-called communists and Marxists, actually do not uphold Stalin. They agree with the billionaire narratives and the manufactured propaganda trying to demonize him, and they buy into that. And so for those people, they just disconnected themselves from history, and they're really subversive, honestly. But do we want to pivot to contemporary reality, because there's a lot going on, and we don't have to, but I'm just suggesting we could start talking about where we are at right now, what's going on, and where should our advocacy lie. I mean, should we have a blue yellow flags in our profiles? Like, do we need to support Ukraine against Russian imperialism? I'll leave it at that. Anybody want to jump in?
I will. Unless one of the other two would. I have been speaking a bit. Ian, Greg, did you want to
Go
reply
for it.
first to that?
You're our first
You're our
time
guest.
guest.
You are our guest, so go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think in terms of contemporary, the U.S. and Russia, just some of my thoughts on that. Yeah, where I live, it's like probably, all over the United States, I find so disgusting that I can't go for a drive to another city, and I'm not exaggerating, without seeing like 100 American flags. We'll have Trump flags, and we'll have Ukrainian flags. And I have found, speaking to something I said earlier about the willful ignorance of Americans, which is going to lead to their downfall as well, the oligarchy, their exploitation. They don't even care. They don't see it. But when you try to bring the truth to them, speak about that Ukraine-Russia conflict, they posted on their Facebooks the Ukrainian flag. But if you just try to have a conversation with them, they don't listen. I know there is a minority who do. I mean, that's why we share the truth. But it's always going to be a minority, I believe, in the United States. Instead, they want to hold on to that, because I think fundamentally, most Americans do not care about right and wrong. Now, as I said earlier, I'm an Orthodox Christian. I view everything spiritually behind the politics and the geopolitics. And it is a spiritual war between good and evil. And Americans, though, once their government and their media, because they are so indoctrinated, says this is the enemy, there's something inherent. Sadly, I see after many years of this that they will not consider another way of looking at it. Critical thinking skills are not in Americans. And I just find that very sad, because even with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, I've actually had people, I've been a guest on shows where I'm actually said they will acknowledge that the history that I tell them about is so, but nevertheless, they'll come back, you're wrong. Why am I wrong? Because that's not what I want to feel. That's not what the society around me agrees. And so I don't see much hope for the Americans. I remember Stalin said, in terms of a capitalist society and imperialist society, and I look at people I've known through my past, those in the libertarian, anarchist even, they want to somehow go against it. But Stalin reminded us that it will wither away on its own. It will break up, I think that he said. And we are there to help guide those who care about the truth as it breaks up. And that is why talking about what's going on in the United States right now, unlike when I was younger, I don't want to save America. I feel that the collapse of the United States as hopefully as a hegemonic power and financially, economically, which will be painful for Americans, is inevitable and is a necessity. And I do not want to do anything to hinder that. That step needs to happen. And I believe it will happen. The evil that they have committed worldwide and all of their military interventions, all of the death and suffering, I do believe that the American people themselves are going to get those. And I believe it to be spiritual consequences. But just looking at it geopolitically, they're going to suffer. And I know it's the people that live around me, but they're all part of it, because I find one-on-one or in groups that their anger and their hatred at someone bringing a different message, they don't ever think about what you just shared with them. They dismiss it because, for example, they want to wave the Ukrainian flag. They don't care about the truth. And it's not the leaders. The leaders come from the people. And I can tell you, you look at the families, you look at companies getting into the capitalism. Greed is a fundamental, sadly, part of the American psyche. And if they had the same power, they would do and subjugate and exploit others. And they do. I remember some woman just going for a walk who said to me, "What's the going rate around here to get someone to do some yard work?" And I was just disgusted. Who cares what the hell the going rate is? Why don't you pay someone what you can pay them? That's what I'm saying. It just seems to me that this society, until it withers away and breaks apart, we don't have an opportunity to change through the intellectual dialogue. But we're there, and there are a few who listen. What say you?
So, okay, we need there's a lot to unpack here. So, okay, yeah, I can understand the frustration. I mean, I feel a lot of frustration as well. I understand where it's coming from, and I would say now I'm less frustrated than I was 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's important to understand that the positions people have out of ignorance, that's ignorance. It's not because they're evil or bad. And also just the average person, the average working class person who's just working on a farm or working in a Walmart or whatever, isn't spending all day thinking about politics. He just looks at the TV, looks at social media. It's like, okay, Russia's bad, China's bad, because, these authority figures and outlets that I trust say these things. Why would they lie? And just, I don't have the time to sit around all day thinking about these things, right? Because I'm tired. I have my job. I have my kids to feed, So just the average person doesn't think that deep into it. And also, it's generally a bad rabbit hole to get into, saying, well, it's suffering is deserved, or there's a karmic. Yes, to an extent, there is a karmic justice to, when one country hurts another country, then it backfires on them. But it's not really constructive either. And I don't think it's actually even constructive for the idea of the USA breaking apart, because yes, I think the unipolar order is over, but you do need a balance, right? The Napoleonic Wars did not end with France being destroyed, right? World War II did not destroyed. those countries, it's so the USA falling apart would create an imbalance. I think there does need to be a balance with China and Russia, and it's actually a positive thing for there to be a balance. No one country should become so powerful there's just no one even strong enough to push back when they're doing something wrong. But though I do, and while I have the by soapbox, I do want to push back a little bit on what one of our commenters said. I know, I'm sorry, Christine. I just want to jump into this real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
That delay is killing us. There's a bad delay.
I really fundamentally disagree. Yeah, it is. I would disagree with that because fundamentally, sadly, I have to speak about my fellow Americans. I agree with you, Ian. They're struggling. I mean, I know people working double jobs, and that you can hardly live in this place anymore. There is no middle class in this place, but yet they still immolate the ones who are oppressing them. And it is as if when you try to point out to them that they are the ones doing it, and yes, you're right, they don't have the time to research it. But when somebody does come to them or they read something, I know this as a writer, when the type of letters, communications that I receive after an essay goes out that is just purely based on facts about American imperialism, you can get such a hostile reaction. They cannot dispute the facts. And I do call it evil to form an opinion just based on your America right or wrong. In fact, I've had people say that to me. It's like, well, if you don't love it, leave it. Well, fine. Yeah. But they don't think, Ian. They don't consider the truth of what might be happening if it goes against. Yes, they're well propagandized, but even when the truth is brought to them, and more than ever in history, people do not have to be ignorant. And even when it's brought right to them, their reaction is of hatred. Americans love to hate. Just give them the enemy. And if you at all question the United States and its premise, they will hate you. And I just think that lack of critical thinking, you should never form an opinion. You may have an opinion, but you should be ready to change it when facts differ with it. But Americans, most of them, aren't that way, at least my experience over many decades.
Well, there's a couple. Well, so one, defeatism. I think one of our commenters just mentioned it or summed it up as defeatism. I mean, the problem is that we're kind of in a post-defeatism era. We can't actually, we can't have defeatism anymore. Be in the era of nuclear weapons. I'm sorry, because when nuclear power sustains a major collapse, it's like, I mean, do you really want that nuclear stockpile to end up in the hands of whoever? So I think we're at this point. We need every country that has nuclear weapons, to include the USA, to not collapse. It's very important, regardless of the goal. But aside from that, it's not constructive. And I do think we don't need a big, great collapse for positive changes to happen.
Well,
I think even
none of us have any control over any of this, right? We're here wondering, what should we be advocating for? What positions should we take? How should we think of things? How should we conceive of what's going on? And so we don't have any control over if the U.S. collapses or not economically. I mean, so again, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and we're probably not going to have any effect on that. But the question becomes like, what should we think of that?
Well, I'm answering that. So So I think even just in the past couple of years, I've seen a positive for the better in the last couple of years, a positive shift in American sentiment. I think it's caused by social media. I mean, so a lot of it's social media because even in the Iraq War, even 22 years ago, right? There's no YouTube. I don't remember exactly your face. I mean, I guess you had MySpace. That was it. You didn't have a live streamed genocide, right? I think we can't downplay the abstraction when violence is an abstract concept, right? It's easier to get people's consent on. You're like, oh, well, it's this faraway country full of weird people who aren't like me. It's an easy sell. But I think what we're having now, and we kind of started to see it in the last several years, and it really accelerated with Gaza. Because Gaza is, I think, the first live streamed genocide, right? And you can see even just that, because Israel has had the USA in its pocket since the 1960s, completely in its pocket. And for the first time, we saw it actually shift. There's actually a majority of Americans now um, increasingly opposed to Israel. That's a first. And that's happening worldwide. I think, so you can take what's happened with Israel and apply it to other things. I think this abstracting of violence that gets people's consent to do these imperialist projects around the world, I think they're going to be less successful at that moving forward, just because you can't cover it up and dress it up however you like with your newspaper articles and carefully sanitized B-roll clips on TV. People see it for themselves on Telegram, on social media.
So, I mean, I'm not sure. So, I
think?
understand where Christine is coming from. Christine is coming from the point of view of, being demoralized at the behavior and attitudes and perceptions and opinions of people in the United States. Like, I totally get that. So, Ian, you're kind of saying that there's a slow shift, and you can see that there's a shift in, people's perspectives, and it might be for the better. And part of that has to do with just the abhorrent ways in which, the United States is behaving, recently with, the live stream genocide in Gaza. I mean, both things can be true, and I think they are. I don't know. There's really a disagreement here that we're talking about.
There isn't. But the genocide. But my point is, the genocide didn't start yesterday. I don't think. Yeah, it's abhorrent, but I don't think it's actually more abhorrent than what Israel was doing in the 1970s and 1960s. What's a first is that we're actually seeing it. We're seeing it. That is the first for Israel. Go ahead, Kristen.
I agree with that completely, but I would have a question for you, Ian. What do you think then, for me, and to something Billy Bob said earlier, and you about the collapse, and of course I just believe it to be inevitable, but I really think that Russia is the hope of the world. I really view China as such an example, and because the United States, almost from its inception, has used its military power for evil, if it does happen, I think it's a good thing, because I don't believe that we can have peace, just like what you're talking about in the Zionist state, as long as the United States has that hegemonic power. So I do welcome that financial and hopefully militarily, the discreditation that's going on, as you said. But my question for you would be, and why do you think that some Americans definitely are caring about what is happening in Gaza, and that is good, because they're able to see it. But our media in the United States, and I guess this is sort of a rhetorical question, but doesn't focus on the suffering of the people of Donbass that has been going on since 2014. The story of the Maidan, much less everything that happened long before then, frankly, that was going on in Ukraine with the United States, and the Banderites, which Stalin actually warned about as well, and agreed not to have them executed. And Khrushchev released them. That's what we have in Western Ukraine to a part. But Ian, why do you think, and what can we do except one-on-one in a show like this, to share the truth about the suffering of the people in Donbass and why this happened, versus the Western, the United States narrative of Russian aggression, of which there has never been any. The SMO that Putin implemented was the righteous action. It had to be taken for the protection of sovereign Russia against NATO expansion, as well as for the Russians who unfortunately ended up in Ukraine in those borders, who were being persecuted, tortured, raped, just as we have the rampant drone attacks now on schools and individuals even the way that these Ukrainians in the regime in the Kiev currently
Okay.
are mistreating their fellow citizens. We don't see that on our media. All we see are some, if they're even real,
So,
in Kiev and Kherson and Kharkiv, and yet no mention of all the suffering that's happening
yes.
daily right now in Russia proper as well, in terms of the Ukrainians killing citizens. And this is who they target. You don't get that in the Western media. Why Gaza and why not Russia?
So, well, okay. So one, well, there's some very bad feedback from somebody. I think that might actually. Let me see. Is it Chris? I'm just gonna guess who it is. Okay, Christine. I think it might have been your microphone. I just muted it for now. But anyways, so to answer the question, well, first, Gaza's worse than anything that's happened in Ukraine or Donbass, right? Regardless of who you sympathize with in that conflict, Gaza is definitely worse. By not even just by a little, it's the worst.
Right.
I think it's the worst thing we've seen for decades, like Rwanda genocide. Maybe I mean it's hard. I mean, you're going back decades at least for anything nearly as bad as what's happening in Gaza. But to answer your question, I think you were kind of asking me what, how do you convince people to get the more pro-Russian perspective on Donbass and Ukraine. I do have to push back a little on what Skoidat, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, our commenter who's been commenting, saying that Stalin would disagree. Well, I don't know how Stalin would feel because Stalin's dead and he's been cremated. You can't really ask him how he would feel about that. It's one of those conflicts. I don't think anyone even 20 years ago would have expected a Russian-Ukraine conflict like this, let alone when Stalin was alive. So it's hard to really figure out how they would feel about. But we have to remember Stalin was
The Winter War.
in the Civil War. Well, the Civil War. I mean,
the Winter War
in Finland, right? But I'm talking about Ukraine. There was conflict in Ukraine. The White Army went down to Ukraine and Crimea, and were defeated there and were exiled from the country. Even World War II, not everybody, in Western Ukraine was in favor of the Soviet Union coming back, or even the Baltic states, the annexation of the Baltic states. Now, of course, pro-NATO and pro-US outlets portray it as this evil, iron fist rolling through the Baltic states, when in reality there was a very large communist movement there, and there was a lot of support for joining the Soviet Union. But at the end of the day, it was a geopolitical necessity, regardless of how the population. It was just let's just be realistic. It was a geopolitical necessity for the Soviet Union to annex the Baltic states in the 1930s.
Well, just like the Winter War was a geopolitical necessity, and just like the SMO was a geopolitical necessity.
Right. I think Stalin would be in favor of this as a buffer against imperialism.
I think the main thing when it comes to Christine, I think the spirit, and Christine, I might muted you because of the feedback. But if you want to say something, just raise your hands, please. I don't want to feel like we just decided to mute her forever. But to answer your question, Christine, I think when it comes to persuading people, well, one, it's basically impossible to persuade people because everybody's so iron concrete, just set in whatever camp they want to be in, and there's just these tribal truths, and it's unfortunate because it seems like every single aspect of our lives, whether it's global warming or gay marriage or guns or Russia or any, it feels like you're supposed to have, the correct opinion on every single topic that your particular camp believes in. And if you even deviate slightly, like if you have your own opinion on gun control or abortion or gay marriage or whatever, and then, they turn on you. It's like, what's wrong with you? You're supposed, this is what you're supposed to think about every topic. So it's very frustrating to see people pushed into these molds You're just not even allowed to have your own ideas of different topics. So it's very frustrating. But I do think, I know it's kind of ironic talking about Stalin and being against nationalism. But I think a nationalist, or at least the national, getting people to think in terms of national interest, because that's just the easiest terms to get people to think. It's like, all right, look, you're American, or you're a Belgian, for God's sake, think of it, so it's like, think of it from your perspective. So, all those things you get upset about, the Netherlands or whatever country you're from, it's like all the stuff you get upset about. Well, just imagine those same things, but affecting Russia, right? Wear their shoes. Like if someone put missiles in the country besides you, if someone put missiles, if China put missiles in Mexico, obviously you'd be all upset about it. Or even Venezuela, for God's sake, they're like, oh, well, Venezuela, it's in our backyard. We have the rights to invade Venezuela because they're in our backyard. You see how hypocritical people are about it. I think you can somewhat easily, I think over time. Not most people are generally not going to change their minds in a day, but I think some people do over months or years can shift their opinions through repeated persuasion. So that's why I encourage people not give up on it. Go ahead, Billy.
I think one of the main drivers that will be something that can shift people's opinions and perspectives is a change in the material conditions, right? So it's not so much, if we're talking to them and trying to explain them things, they're not really going to care about what we think if their lives continue on as normal. But once their lives are interrupted, once they're asked to sacrifice, once their lives become harder, that's going to be the biggest opportunity we have to, explain to them what the fuck is going on. And hopefully, again, like Christine was saying, I mean, if and when that happens, I mean, who are we to, lament it, right? We're gonna be thankful for it because it'll give us an opportunity to really, be able to get people on board with what's going on. But I did want to pivot a little bit to, and it's not even a pivot. I want to focus more on Russia, and I wanted to ask Christine if she has a perspective on a question that we've talked about a few times on the show. And it's kind of, how did Putin end up in power? How did Yeltsin decide to leave power? Do you have any idea, or do you have a particular narrative that you find most appealing as to how that transfer went from the drunk, real embarrassment of Yeltsin over to, a decent manager, an honest, somebody with integrity like Putin? Like how did that transfer of power happen? Do you have an inside scoop on that in your expertise? Oh, I'm sorry, Christine. I was asking you.
Are you asking
Yeah,
me,
I'm
Billy
sorry.
Bob?
Yes, sorry.
Well, I mean, I speculate based upon what is publicly known. Certainly, Yeltsin had no idea he had to leave. They could not continue to have him there. So he resigned, which was a shot to the Soviet people as well. But it needed to be done, and so I think that the choice of Putin was completely, Putin was going to continue along with his complete openness. I mean, we think about Yeltsin, the United States, and all of that shenanigans. I mean, it was, I think that he really felt, though, he did trust Putin. And he had probably met Putin about 8 years, I think, before 1999, December, when he resigned. I believe that, he had come to trust him. And as you said, polite and just felt that it would be, I forget how Putin was at the time. He was maybe like 47, 48, something like that. And I just felt that they wanted someone younger, and they felt that he was trustworthy. He had been involved in their bureaucracy, if you will. But right afterwards. In fact, it didn't take long before Yeltsin was very much, expressing anti-Putin sentiments. Not that it mattered to anybody. Putin truly saved Russia at that time in terms of it was in crisis, both for the terrorism financially, as we all know. He really was the answer. But Yeltsin actually said that it was the worst decision he had ever made, if he, quote, truly made it. I'm not sure that he did anything alone, but he was probably a part of it. And that it was the worst decision. For example, when Putin brought back the national anthem, beautiful Russian Federation anthem that we have now, but the music from the Soviet anthem, which I love, that was very important. It's like recognizing everybody in your society. But Yeltsin expressed multiple times these changes. He felt it was going back to the Soviet times, which of course it wasn't. Putin has never tried to do that, but it was more of a respect for all the people and our historic past. So I think that he may have been really shocked and disturbed, but nevertheless, the good happened.
Well, I mean, Putin was prime minister of Russia. He was next in line. I mean, we can ask and Billy about it. Maybe elaborate on your question, because I mean, we know what happened. He resigned, so maybe the question is: did Yeltsin voluntarily realize, because of the financial collapse from the partial default on loans that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I have heard
or
a
if he was
narrative,
coerced,
right, where Putin it was more the nationalists were disgusted by the embarrassment that Yeltsin was, selling out Russia, and just being a drunk, in public all the time. And so they kind of coerced him out. But yeah, I mean, all we can do is speculate on what we've heard. And so there's no authoritative understanding of how that went. But I would like to think that that it was more coercive. But maybe Yeltsin was, voluntarily stepped down and realized that, he would prefer to not have to be in public drunk all the time and not be such an embarrassment. But yeah, no, I wanted to get Christine's take on that. And then obviously Putin has been a tremendous success. I mean, I've seen memes that demonstrate, the quality of life and the access to opportunity, the increased wages, etc., have just skyrocketed. And Putin actually, he had a plan, and he wrote a doctoral thesis on how to stabilize the Russian economy. And it had to do with renationalizing the natural gas and oil sectors of the economy, which were privatized after, the dismantling of the Soviet Union. And then really just getting the oligarchs under control. And he did both of those things, and it did to provide tremendous benefit to the Russian economy. But in the West, they've obviously seen that attacking Russia, balkanizing Russia, and getting their hands in controlling Russian resources was a key mission of Western imperialism. And so, obviously dismantling the Soviet Union was the number one project. But then after that, it became, to utilize Russia's neighbors and weaponize them against Russia. And and then after Putin refused to play ball like Yeltsin did, they thought that, Putin had to go. So regime change of Russia, using, Russian neighbors as springboards, right, to do that. And I mean, this has been what has been going on since 1991. And we've seen, NATO has gobbled up like 13 former Soviet satellite republics, and they've just been encircling Russia in order to, put pressure on them, regime change, and then balkanize Russia. Like, they're open about it. Like, this is what the think tanks say we're going to do. And so it's just particularly dismaying when people who supposedly, embrace the Soviet Union and Stalin don't understand just what the fuck is going on. And there's a continuation of what happened. So it was the communists that won World War II, 30 million Russians sacrificed, 20 million Chinese sacrificed. And the primary beneficiary was the United fucking States. like they were the unearned beneficiary of World War II, and they developed a global empire with 1,000 foreign military bases to dominate the world subsequent to that. And that was what the Cold War was. And so now, they're on the march, and they're feeling threatened. Their global hegemony is feeling threatened. And so they are, trying desperately to contain China, which is a euphemism for, destroying their economy. And they're trying to, balkanize Russia and get their hands on resources. This is what the Western Empire needs to do to survive into the rest of the 21st century. And so that's what we're going to be seeing played out in front of us and taking place in these next years and decades. But I don't know why I launched into that long diatribe, but I don't know why I'm yelling. I think it's because I have a low blood sugar, and that's just how I behave, and I apologize for myself. But I'm interested in really having a discussion with this Skoidat, because he obviously supports Stalin, but he obviously hates Putin, and he denigrates Russia, and he thinks that it's imperialist. And so it's this is the confused mindset that I think is problematic, and it just misses the objective reality of what's going on. Go ahead, Ian.
Well,
Or somebody.
I don't agree with it. I don't agree with Skoidat on Donbass and Crimea, obviously, because I'm in Crimea. But but I do have to agree with him that Soviet Union and Russian Federation. And I think there is a tendency for American leftists to talk at people rather than with people, and that's true for Russia, because Russia is not communist. The Communist Party is the second biggest party in Russia after United Russia. But those are the boomers. Those are the nostalgic people who are voting for the Communist Party because it's the same name as the party during the so it's not a communist system anymore. It's not realistically, you can't put the capital. Unfortunately, when it comes to Russian capitalism, you just can't put that genie back in the bottle. You can nationalize certain key industries, like you mentioned, the oil and gas industry has been largely nationalized. The defense sector has been nationalized. Agriculture largely nationalized. So a lot of key industries are. And I think that's kind of the way forward for a lot of countries, because when you do what Argentina did and what Western, those Western Bloc countries want you to do, you want you to embrace the free market. Well, okay, you have these penny sales, like with what Ukraine did, what Argentina did, and what happens? Foreign investors, BlackRock or whoever, BlackRock's the big baddie at the moment, but there's other companies too. Just foreigners buy your resources, and you don't control them anymore. And you have these very exploitative arrangements, like with Africa, where you just have these situations where France stockpiles all of your gold and you get nothing. Your resources are exploited for, like, for example, lithium is used to make batteries. But the final product, that battery, is sold for 1,000% markup or whatever the markup is, and the country that lithium was dug up from gets basically nothing. I think that's the neo-colonialist model, that everybody's kind of settled on, and really pressures people to not like Venezuela. Venezuela is one of those holdouts in the Monroe Doctrine. In the USA's backyard, they're one of the holdouts that is not playing along, and so that's why they're being pressured. So I think he's right that as far sorry, I sidetracked into Venezuela, but what Skoidat was saying about Russia is true. It's a capitalist system. It's a different country. I mean, it's a cultural. it is literally the successor of the Soviet Union, but ideologically, it's not. It's a new. It's a successor in this. It's like how the Russian Empire became the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union became the Russian Federation. It's another step.
Legally, it was a successor
Right.
state. It
But
was given the Security Council seat.
Right, but it's not. It's not.
It's not communist for sure. And
Right.
Putin is not a communist. No, definitely. It's interesting because it gets it to the heart of the question of what is communism, what is socialism, and these are good discussions to have. But there's an idea in the liberal West that that's not real communism and that's not real socialism. And this whole idea about real socialism, I think, is a problem. And again, the whole point of it is to get people not to support the actually existing socialist countries that have been, pursuing and trying to achieve socialism, like China is one, and like the Soviet Union was doing. But yeah, Putin definitely does not embrace, socialism with Russian characteristics. That's true. And I wish he would, because I think that would be appropriate. But if you look at how the economy functions, it is not too different from how the economy of China functions under a communist party. So there's similarities there. It's a mixed economy. It's a market economy, and you have private ownership. But the private owners do not control the government. The private owners do not dictate policy. So the policy is maintained by the government, and the government, has expressly said, the government of Putin has expressly said, if you want to be an oligarch and make money, you can stay in the country. If you want to, try and influence politics, you better get the fuck out. And so I think that's what a lot of people did. But so anyway, I think there's a lot of similarities, even though he's not, embracing the label of socialist. I think there's a lot of socialist aspects to Russia. And like Todd said, the greatest thing about Russia is that they are the vanguard of anti-imperialism, and that's absolutely true.
I think Dust made a good comment that a lot of these progressive qualities we're seeing are something that Russia was pushed into by us and might not otherwise be happening, including
that's true. I mean, they have no choice but to be anti-imperialist because
in alliance with their old communist allies.
Yeah.
Might not have happened.
Christine, I know you have some thoughts. We've all been rambling for a while. Did you want to get in? We'll give you time.
Well, first of all, your however you referred to it when you kind of digressed and spoke, I thought was excellent. It is in a very succinct way exactly what was going on with Ukraine and NATO expansion, and I just thought it was an excellent flow of your thoughts.
Okay, you just got invited
in
back.
regards to one of your in regards to one of your viewers, and I've seen him on some of your other shows make his comments. He supports Stalin as we do, but he's extremely anti-Putin. I don't know exactly why, Ian, you had the mute immediately after this person said something. I did not read what he said, but whatever it was, I think it's very interesting to see anyone, if indeed, and I don't know what the comment was, would react in anger. We can have a rational discussion, or we should be able to, among intellectuals. And I, for one, feel that Stalin was a good man and a wise leader, and I appreciate him, and I feel he saved the Soviet Union, saved Russia. And I feel likewise, a different time, Putin is a good man, and he saved Russia. And to me, I appreciate both of them. Russia is evolving. Each of us as individuals are evolving. Putin is evolving. As long as we are breathing, we can evolve. And I look at the turbulent history of the Soviet Union and Russia, but despite everything that has happened, there is a wonder to it and a beauty to it. And I have to say, I deeply appreciate Vladimir Putin for what he's done. And I do feel that Russia is leading the way along with China. And I'm very appreciative of BRICS. One One can be a Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, but also appreciate others who are advancing the good. You need not agree with everything in order to let that stop you from appreciating. Just like you can appreciate Stalin, you can certainly appreciate Putin. And I appreciate both men. I think that without the Russian Federation that we have today, and neither would we have it except for Putin. And I am, God bless Vladimir Putin for what he's doing, for not only for Russia, but for the world.
I think there's. Well, I wouldn't. Well, I mean, I think we need to be realistic, right? And I think there's a tendency for American support for Russia to not be realistic. Like in World War II, there was it was a Hollywood propaganda movie. It was a pro-Soviet called Mission to Moscow, and it was seen as so pro-Stalin and so pro-Soviet. Even Soviet audiences found it unbelievable. So I just think we don't need to get too crazy with. I mean, I think the best support is realistic support. We don't need to declare Putin a saint to say he was the right person.
I don't think Christine said anything unreal. Like I agree with her sentiments exactly. I mean,
but let me finish.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, I don't agree with Skoidat saying, Russia is another side of the imperialist coin. I think it's important to remember that imperialism has a very specific definition. It doesn't just mean, country A attacked country B because they're big meanies and they're bigger than country B. That's not what imperialism and colonialism actually mean. If you need, for it to be a true colonial state, an empire, you need an unequal system. You need an oppressed. You need, it does need to be a prison house of nations. You do need those second-class citizens. You need those oppressed nations of people who are not given the same rights and privileges as the imperial court, right? So the British Empire, the French Empire, Israel, even. But in Russia, where they did say, well, guess what? This territory is rejoining Russia. It doesn't. They aren't colonized. Donbass is not a colony. Crimea is not a colony. Novorossiya is not a colony. They're just joining Russia, and they're all Russian citizens. They get Russian passports. They vote in Russian elections. They pay Russian taxes. They do all the same things as everybody else in the Russian Federation. So it's not. So you can say it's completely fine for someone to say I don't think Russia should have taken territory from Ukraine. And I don't agree with the justification they gave for you. Those are perfectly fine things to say, but it's not imperialism. It's not colonialism. And I think it's a true statement that the Russian Federation is not imperialist. It is capitalist. It is to an extent chauvinistic, even, but it's not imperial, and it's definitely not colonial. So I'm off my soapbox now. If anyone wants to push back against anything I said there. No, nobody.
Well, there's a delay. Give her time.
There's a delay. Yes.
I mean, you're not. Saying anything too controversial. And I think again, sometimes we're talking past each other, and there's really not much of a disagreement. But no, it's hard to overstate what Putin has accomplished for Russia and for humanity in its decision to push back against Western imperialism. How do you overstate that? Like I can't overstate what a tremendous thing it is. And again, Putin met with Xi, and they said, we're seeing changes that we haven't seen in 100 years, and so it's I don't know. I don't see any reason to push back on what Christine said. I don't see any reason to push back on what you said. I don't think they're really disagreeing, but lionizing and being thankful for the person of Vladimir Putin is entirely necessary. I mean, it's legit. So, but anyway, where do we want to go from here? So I think we all appreciate Putin, maybe to various degrees. Greg, you had something?
Yeah, just a little more on this question of imperialism. I mean, Russia's not imperialist by the Marxist or Leninist definition. It's not an advanced capitalist country with financialized, monopolized capital dominating. And it's arguably not by the more traditional definition either, because this war is pretty much as if a foreign power took over Mexico and started massing troops against the U.S., it would be uncontroversial and not considered imperialist here to go deal with that government.
No, thank you, Greg. I just don't get it at all. Russia is responding to imperialist aggression. They are responding to NATO marching eastward. And defense against imperialism ought not be called imperialist. Like, that's just so crazy. And so for people that have that perception, yeah, I think they're confused. And we live in a society based on confusion, where confusion is perpetuated on purpose, because that confusion solidifies the ownership class with their obscene share of wealth, power, and privilege. And they don't want to lose that obscene share of wealth, power, and privilege. And so they're going to confuse us. They're going to behave violently. And, we're going to see in the next year or so exactly what their plan is to maintain, their privilege. But I think that inevitably they don't have the cards to play. And there's room for optimism because of Russia, because of Putin, because of China, because of Xi. We're going to see what happens in Venezuela. I'm pretty optimistic that Maduro is strong, and the Venezuelan people are going to support him. That seems like it could very well be the very next big flashpoint, geopolitical flashpoint. But Christine, we have really not let you got a word in edgewise. If you want to, I'm ready to wrap up a little bit because my blood sugar is low. We've done a good hour and a half. But if you have any final comments or anything before we wrap up, it's been great having you as our first-time guest. I especially liked when you said nice things about me, and for that you will be returning. That's a joke. But yeah, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just that all of us, each of us, not only on this panel, but our audience, should take the truth as they believe it to be so, that they know at this point in their life, and have the courage to share it when those opportunities are brought to you. The points of disagreement are less than the points of agreement among us here and probably our audience. And that which you feel strongly about, share it. And never think about the repercussions. That strength, that resilience, it is a battle. Just like when we look at the Great Patriotic War, the great courage and resilience of the Soviet people and their suffering, but they did it to defend the motherland, to defend their country, their way of life. We should also, in a different way, everything's a battle. Everything is a battle between this good and evil. And to the degree that you believe and you have your convictions at this time in your life, you may even be wrong. I know that I have been sincerely wrong in my life. But right now, the truth as I know it, I am going to share with the full force of who I am. And I would just ask everybody to have that courage, regardless of the society around you, and even the persecution that can come. Share the truth as you know it. That is essential, and that is lacking in many people. But that is what I would say, and I would thank all on the panel and Billy Bob for having me. It has been an enjoyable, thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you so much, Christine. Yeah, we we appreciate you and your commentary. And I think we do need to normalize discussions among people that disagree, and it's very important. And so, yeah, I concur. And people should be not just unafraid to speak the truth as they know it, but they should also be unafraid to hear counterpoints of view and to even maybe change their opinions. Don't rigidly hold to your what you think is true. Engage with an open mind, and that's the best we can hope for. So, Greg, any final thoughts?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Ian, you want to get the last word?
I will let you have the last word because it's very important for you. I know. So I'll let you have it.
Okay. No, because I've found that whoever gets the last word is usually the right one, the one who's most correct. So no, we will reconvene next week. And
Well, Skoidat. I challenge Skoidat to come on and debate Billy Bob. I want to see. He should come on next show. We should have him.
No, I've told him we should, he should jump on the stream and we can discuss our differences, and that would be tremendous. I would really enjoy that, and I would be very polite and nice, and so and again, it's tough to find people that I disagree with to come on and have the discussion. But hopefully, open invitation. Whoever's interested, instant message me and we can set something up. But okay, with that, we will reconvene next week. Thank you very much, everyone. See you then.